and then went off to IIT Kanpur to do a mechanical engineering undergraduate degree, a BTech, and then went to the States. And I have lived there ever since. It's getting on for many, many decades now. And so I've been, thinking about what stories we can really tell. I can tell you about my path and the kind of things that I've learned in my path. I just did a convocation talk at IIT Kanpur and had to, sort of look back quite a bit and say, okay, here I am. I didn't realize I would ever get to be this old, and so what did I learn from all of these decades on Earth? And so, let me tell you where I started off. I come from a middle class family. My dad was a civil engineer. My mother, interestingly, was trained as a marine zoologist at a time, as many of you know, who, women didn't go to college much. I mean, they usually just got married off in high school, and that was the end of that. And that was also my grandmother's story. She never went to, second grade was as far as she got. And it was odd in those days, right? My grandfather was a doctor. So he was very well educated, had a really successful career as a doctor, but my grandmother, on the other hand, had a second grade education, right? That's all she had. And this isn't because they were dumb or stupid or any of those things. These were very well, very intelligent women, very strong-willed women, frequently more intelligent than their husbands and frequently more strong-willed than their husbands. But, society was what it was, and therefore didn't let them, take the kind of pathways that they could easily have had in their lives, and it just never happened. My mother and my father were both the children of Indian independence. They were teenagers, young teenagers at the time independence happened. And it feels to me that their worldview was very different. At the time, it was, world was changing. India was in this whole, period of extreme change, right? The Brits were going, the world seemed to them to be opening up completely. They were both scientifically oriented, so they had a very sciencey view of life, and therefore believed in progress and, human improvement. And were willing to break a lot of rules, that they came into it with a mindset that was, in some sense, far less constrained than the generation before them. And I was sort of the happy recipient of that radical thinking about what women could be, and a lot of it came from my mother. So my mother wanted to go to medical school. At the time, her parents, even though her father was a doctor, they thought this was too much. We're not going to let a girl, go spend nights in the hospital. There are all these men around. What are we going to do? We're not going to let her in there. And so she ended up going to college, of course, but got a marine zoology degree. There were no jobs for women marine zoologists. Who's going to employ them? My father was in railways. He was getting transferred all over. So she basically ended up looking after the children, but a very well-educated, very intelligent woman. She had 3 daughters, and you all know what that means in India. No boys, 3 girls. But in a way, that was also a boon because, I was going to be the boy because that's all we were, right? There were only 3 girls. And so we ended up getting a lot of chances that I know that my school friends in St. Anne's High School did not get, right? And so it was a presumption that we would get degrees, solid degrees, that we would have jobs and careers. And we were always pushed to be in that mode. My mother would not allow me to enter the kitchen. I did not know how to boil water and make a cup of tea until I was a grown woman because she simply would not allow me to take that route. And so a lot of pressure to perform academically, a lot of high expectations, but also a lot of resources, so they were very focused on our education, which was very unusual at that time. And so I went, and with all this, and my mother literally used to wake up at 4 a.m. to make me study for my board exams and ISC exams. She did as much work studying as I did, because her aspiration for us was so high. So from that really came IIT. I was one of 2 women in my IIT class of about 250 men. It was an interesting time. The university was not set up for women. It's almost like they hadn't thought that there would be any women showing up. The girls' hostel had been built just the year before. It was mostly empty. But there were many good things and bad things, right? So on the one hand, it was a university with high aspirations, lots of really smart young people, people who are striving to do well. And so to be surrounded by excellence was such an important thing for a young person to have. But at the same time, there was how women, we were unusual in that place. My entire undergraduate program had 6 or 7 women total in all years, all fields combined. And our being there was just not a thing that anybody expected or knew how to deal with. The competition to get in was so high that we were always considered interlopers. I mean, why are you people here? You're taking seats that belong to the boys. You're just going to go home and get married. And why the heck do you want this? That was a constant theme. Nobody took us very seriously. Nobody thought we could do well. There was this big belief that girls just didn't do math and engineering. At some level, low-level harassment was pretty common. Our bike tires would get let out of air, once a week probably. Difficulty finding lab partners. Nobody wanted to work with us on projects. So these kinds of things were a constant. But even in that, there were always allies. There were always men who were able to think outside the box. So over time, second year onwards, slowly you began to form friendships. People understood that you were just a human being like everybody else. And so for many of us, all of us, I would say, first of all, found a lot of community in each other because we were all we had for quite a while. But also increasingly young men who were a little bit out of the box thinkers, willing to take risks, and so even to this day I have a lot of, my friends from IIT are lifelong friends, and they are of both sexes, and they're really close to all of them. And so I was trying to, distill some of these ideas in my convocation talk in IIT, and basically the theme I had expressed there is that you have to choose. The world will tell you many, many stories about who you are, what you're worthy of, what you're capable of. But you got to tell your own story. You got to pick your own story, and the story that you pick will allow, if you choose the right story, it will allow you to propel yourself forward. If you choose the wrong story, it will just finish you off, right? So you can't pick the story that the world is telling you, which is, hey, girls can't do engineering, girls can't do math, why are you doing this, get out of here. Instead, you pick the story that rejuvenates you, which is, hey, I got into IIT, I must have a brain, I must be smart enough. Here's a chance for us to really learn things, to cash in on everything that this opportunity offers, and that's the story that we really tried to live off of. And I think it actually worked really well for all of us, not just me, but everybody in that group. So yeah, so after that I went off to graduate school. Again, it's really early in the game. I was the first woman PhD out of mechanical engineering in the University of Minnesota. Again, very few women. But what had changed quite a lot was that the women's movement had really taken off in the US. By the time I came along, it had been going on for about decade plus. increasingly a sense of women wanting to break barriers, and I think a much more sophisticated understanding of what women could do and could be. And so I found graduate school really good. I mean, a very good environment with a lot of collaboration and lots of support for good work, and really felt very comfortable and happy in graduate school. Turns out work was a whole different story. So after graduate school, I went off, I had an assistant prof position in ASU, Arizona State University. There again, I was the first woman ever to join the department. And, there you don't have buddies anymore. I mean, you don't have young people your age, you don't have graduate student friends. I was 26 years old, the first woman ever to be hired in that department. I was a foreigner, I was not married. Most of the department was much older than me. They had kids, they had, dogs, mortgages, they were commuting. I had nothing, I was living out of a couple of boxes of clothes. And of course, the graduate students, you are a professor, so they don't want to have anything to do with you. They got their own life. So it was an intensely lonely and difficult time. I mean, just finding your feet, finding any kind of stability is very hard in those situations. But I knew that I wanted to do research. I knew that I wanted to teach, and so I couldn't figure out how to survive this kind of extreme isolation, right? So got tired of it. Some of my friends called from graduate school saying, hey, we're in a consulting company, we're doing computational fluid dynamics, which is my subject. We're building software, you don't seem like you're liking it up there, why don't you come and join us? Which I did. So dumped everything, got out of academics, went off to New Hampshire, a small consulting company, from which we spun off a CFD software company called Fluent Inc. Very early days in the CAD/CAM CAE business, it was just starting. And so we began to write. So the idea was this, right? So at the time, the way computational fluid dynamics was done was that the big companies, GE, GM, all these guys, Ford, used to write, just beginning to think that simulation could help them do design of cars and airplanes and whatnot better. They didn't fully believe it. Mostly they used to just sort of run experiments and use the experiments to do their design. But people are just beginning to think that simulation, computational simulation, could actually be done to simulate the flow of air or water or whatever, to simulate industrial processes. So they used to have a bunch of PhDs sitting in Ford or whoever. They would write their own code for their particular application, full of bugs and, having to spend a lot of money maintaining and running these codes. And everybody had their own code. Ford had theirs, GM had theirs, IBM had theirs. So what we thought was we would radically democratize CFD. So we said, we are going to write CFD code that is general purpose. I don't care whether you're doing flow over a car or inside a duct or over whatever. We will write software in such a way it could be used generally. We will write the software, we will maintain the software, we will debug it, we will enhance it as your needs go. What you do is you pay us a license. Don't be maintaining your own codes. We will hold your hand, we will help you use software. And so it actually radically cut down their costs. They had to pay us licenses, but it's still much cheaper. So we built a whole new business around CAE, computer-aided analysis software, built a new business. And it really took off. And that's the model really that is dominant today in terms of how CFD is actually done. Right? So I was employee number 7 in the company before we spun off. At the time it was sold in 2006, it was about 800 employees. Set the whole template for this kind of work. The company that bought us, ANSYS, is widely used, not just in CFD, but other kinds of simulation as well. Just sold, I think, last month to Synopsys, which does, TCAD kind of, ECAD, TCAD kind of stuff. And they were sold for $37 billion. So, so there's been a huge multiplier. I wish I had a chunk of that. I don't, in case you're thinking that I do. But it was, so what really changed for me is that at the time, I thought I was done. I mean, leaving academics, I felt, okay, this is it. I mean, this is the end of my scientific life, and, I'm not going to, I'm going to do some kind of dead-end job somewhere, and that's going to be the end of me. Turned out not to be the case. I mean, and again, in the vein of storytelling, the story, I could have believed was that, you're done. You should have done a better job. You should have stuck to academics. You screwed up, and now, you go do some crappy job somewhere. That didn't turn out to be the case. The story was that we were trying to do something difficult and interesting and radical. And we were a bunch of young people with lots of ideas, not much money, but, lots of ideas. And from that came something creative. We were hungry, so we were willing to take risk. And from that, something really good got built that truly did change the way engineering is done in industry, right? To bring simulation so deeply into the design process was a new thing. And from that came, self-confidence and an idea that I could actually do something that was, interesting. I did want to come back to academics because that was always, teaching was always my, first love. And so came back. And when I came back, I said, I am not going to be doing any kind of management. I don't want to be, department chair or dean or anything. Absolutely not for me, because I wanted to come back and actually do research and, get my hands dirty, which I did. So, but at the tail end of that, what happened was that I won a large research center. It was on, again, simulation, but simulation of microsystems, right? Really small scale, with uncertainty quantification. Lots of good technical stuff in there, which I loved doing. And my team, as it happened, was really young professors. I mean, these were starting assistant professors. And I chose them deliberately because they were so hungry, they wanted to succeed. And so they, if you took some of the more senior people, yeah, their reputation would help you win the center, but they were not going to do anything that I wanted them to do. They had their own research agendas and their own mature research directions, so they weren't really willing to adapt to the center. So I felt that young people would be much more interested in trying something new that they weren't already doing. So I brought the young people in, and they really hustled. I mean, they have built beautiful careers. When I go take a look at the kinds of things that they're doing, some of it came from the center, some of it were things that they themselves thought up, lots of new research directions. And what came from that was, for me, a realization that perhaps helping young academics succeed is not such a terrible thing after all. I mean, so maybe there's something to being a department chair or a dean if you can make these bigger systems work for these young people. And so I jumped into being a department chair at UT Austin, and from that came the deanship at UCLA. And then the scale got bigger and bigger, and finally I am now president at Oregon State University. Not doing I'm not doing any research anymore at this point, but I have the privilege of seeing the big swath of work that's going on all across the university research-wise, not just engineering, but agriculture and forestry and health and so on, which is a real privilege. The other thing that I've really learned is, I was brought up on this tale of excellence, all right? You gotta hustle, you gotta get the grades, you gotta win. And I think excellence is a really important thing. But over time, I've come to understand that to some degree, my own excellence is really interwoven with privilege, all right? I come from a middle-class family. We're not wealthy, but we were not poor either, right? I don't think I was ever denied the opportunity to study. I was sent to the best schools, I was given every resource. I was not dumb, of course, none of us is, But that mixture of privilege and intelligence is really what got me where I am. And in my current job, and even in my job as dean, began to be aware that there's a whole swath of young people who are perfectly talented, all right, but who come from backgrounds that don't give them this kind of, chance to study for IIT, and my mother will cook all my food and she will not let me do anything. That's not the way many lives go, even in a rich country like US, right? So at Oregon State University, roughly a third of our students are first generation in college. That is, even now, in a rich country like the US, these are people whose parents did not go to college, right? They frequently come from disadvantaged communities, folks from the Latinx community or from the black community. They frequently come from rural areas where there's not a big desire for degrees. I mean, if you're running a farm, maybe you don't really need a PhD, So there's a sense that college is not really needed. But there are young people who are very talented, who are really bright. Rural schools are not always the best schools. Schools in disadvantaged areas are not always highly resourced. They don't have good teachers. They don't, So what we're really looking at, for me, the revelation has been that, you can take geniuses and get them, degrees, and they're going to do well. And truthfully, whether I did anything or not, they're going to probably do well anyway. They don't really actually need me. I think the biggest satisfaction is to take people who have raw talent, but who don't have an easy path. And if we can make those people successful, then I think one has really earned one's salary, all right? And so that's really the thinking. I mean, so we, of course, want the best students we can, but a big focus for us is to create that ladder for people who have the talent but haven't had a pathway for themselves, right? And so a big focus for what we're doing at OSU is to create that, create those kinds of pathways. So that's what my strategic plan has been. Is one big focus is, of course, on research and the things that OSU does well. A big focus is on student success. How can I bring in students of all backgrounds, make sure that graduation rates are sufficiently high, that they can get into the kinds of lives and professions that they want. And a third focus for me has always been that we should be deeply connected to the world. I don't think of higher ed or education as some kind of an ivory tower where we sit, we close off all the doors and we think deep thoughts and, we're not worried about the world. I think, and as you do too, as IIIT does as well, a strong connection to problems that matter, to people that matter, and speaking and connecting to the world is a big part of the way I think about what university should be. And so this connection is part of that network building, and of course, we are connected all across Oregon as well. So we have, and this philosophy of wanting to connect to the world and wanting to do right in the world is really how our faculty are as well. I mean, if you come to Oregon State, you'll find this big desire to connect and to do right. People, I mean, there are people, of course, who want to prove theorems, and that's a good thing. Don't worry, that absolutely should happen. But there's always a burning desire that the things that we do have to matter in the world, right? And that's the driving philosophy of our place. So yeah, so let me stop there and maybe open this up for conversation. You can ask, it's fine.
The question was, especially at IIIT, they were very conscious of trying to attract them to
Yeah.
the institute, all
Yeah.
graduate faculty, all that.
Yeah.
What is the situation generally in the US and in particular at your university?
Yeah, good question. I actually think you guys are doing better than us. At OSU, I mean, OSU is half and half men and women, not by design, all right? I mean, that we're not allowed to pick women preferentially. We're a state university, so no quotas are allowed for us, right? But half and half is not, I mean, we are a STEM-centric university, so therefore half and half is a bit surprising. So if you look at some of my previous institutions like UCLA, UCLA is 60% women. It's majority women, and you'll find that in almost every university in the US, right? Because these are not tech universities, right? These are broad-based ones. So in the US, the current trend is that women are going to college far more than men are going to college. And in fact, the real worry is that the college-going male, that population is shrinking very quickly, right? And there is an increasing belief that you don't really need college. Hey, I'm going to go and get myself electrician certificate, or I'm going to go work on machines, and that's plenty good enough. Some of that thinking is driven by the extreme cost of college. It's very expensive to go to college in the US. Even public universities are pretty expensive. And so, but those kind of pathways of being, mechanic or an electrician are less open to women. So the thinking is that that's the reason that women are going to college more. Right now, but if you look at engineering and technology and places like IIIT, the numbers are nowhere near half and half. So at OSU, we are about 25% women in the engineering program, even though the overall university is half and half. In UCLA, when I was there, we started at about 23, 24%. This year, the entering class is 40% women. Because of very explicit programs that we put in place, not as a reservation, but as building the pipeline, of making people aware that we have, that we are a friendly place for women and there can be women coming in. The bigger difference is that women choose certain majors preferentially, all right, everywhere. This is true at OSU, it's true at UCLA. Bioengineering is 65% women, it's majority women. Environmental is about 50-50 women. Civil and environmental, yeah, something like that. But if you look at computer science, if you look at mechanical engineering, that's like 16, 17, 18% women. So women too, because of the way we bring them up or whatever, seem to want a connection to humanity in some way. They want to do good in the world, right? So I generally found in my conversations that young women want that connection, So if you do pure theorem proving, they won't find it very exciting. They just won't choose that major at all. They tend, for whatever, in historical reasons, social reasons, I don't know what drives them, but there is a very real desire to do things that matter in the world, And I actually happen to think this is a good thing because to do very sterile engineering is not satisfying to anybody, men or women, and so bringing that feeling of connection is actually a good thing for engineering and computer science. I really think that's a good thing.
As you said that you were first into teaching, then you went to work with a small company and it grew, and then you again went to academics as you wanted to. So what was your reason that academics was always your first choice?
For me, I wanted, first of all, I wanted to teach. I always liked teaching. I taught as a graduate student and really loved it. And I liked the research life. I wanted some space to think long term and to do things that had a longer horizon. So that was one thing. And the other thing is when our company went public, I got really sick of dealing with Wall Street and, quarterly reporting and that kind of thing. I just wanted a little bit of ease to think in a longer term sort of way.
So can you talk about because you talked about affordability of the college, right?
Yeah.
So do you think the online education has made it more affordable, or what do you think, what is the trend in US right now?
Okay, so online, has the potential to make it cheaper, but it hasn't yet made it cheaper. Well, I'll tell you it's cheaper in this respect, all right? It's cheaper in terms of in two ways. One is, of course, room and board you don't pay for. So at OSU, if you look at the price tag, about half is tuition and the other half is room and board. So you, if you live at home, you have automatically, saved that. The other thing that really happens with online is people frequently work and do college side by side. So online students are not your traditional 16, 17, 18-year-old people. They are almost always people who are holding down a job or already married and who have kids and who are trying to get didn't go to college right away but are now trying to get a college degree. So frequently people who are getting even undergraduate degrees are people who are holding down jobs, taking a bit longer and doing that. People who are getting graduate degrees like masters frequently have companies paying for their online degrees. That's the common mode. And they're, getting promoted and getting regular salary while getting a higher degree, right? So that's one thing. And then the third kind of person we have is a person who got a BA in English and now suddenly wants to do computer science. So post-baccalaureate, trying to get a BS in computer science is another kind of person. Sometimes it has nothing to do with degrees. They just want a certificate in AI because they got a mechanical degree or something else. And so that's part of it.
Thank you for a wonderful talk. And the topic where, say, the digital or online learning is becoming kind of increasingly more. And then also the last point that you mentioned where the degrees are not necessarily a thing for which people come to the college or university. So, from your vantage point as a head of a university, how do you see this going in next, say, 10, 15 years?
Yeah.
What is the relevance of a typical university in terms of promoting higher education and other things?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, all right? There are people who tell you, what are you guys good for? We'll just give out, Google will give out certificates and that's all we'll ever need. I don't buy that, right? I think certificates are fine post degree. Think of yourself as a doctor, right? You're really going to go to a doctor who's got a certificate in like heart surgery? No way, right? That's just not going to happen. I can understand that a doctor will want a certificate in, some new gene therapy, but has a fundamental, medical degree. And the same thing is true of engineering. I would not get into an airplane designed by some guy who got a certificate from Google, right? I would want that person to actually know some aerodynamics, to have done some hands-on work, and gone through the ringer of fundamental training, all right? So I don't buy, there's no easy path to hard subjects, all right? There's nothing that Google can tell you in 6 months that you spent 4 years learning. That's just not the case.
You said when you were in IIT, you had like 2 women in the whole batch. The situation in IIIT today is we have about 25% women students. They still have problem with project partnering. Because 75% are men and things happen in the hostels and these don't, they're inaccessible. So we are trying to create public places where that open labs, etc., where they can do project work, etc. So must have been very difficult in your times. Now, how does that combine with online? Online you're all lonely. In one way of looking at it, because college is not about the degree, knowledge or math. It's also about the interactions and the friendship circles. You also mentioned the IIT friends are your lifelong friend. So how does that, how do you bring this into the online education?
I hear you. That's a huge concern. And it's a concern that's showing up in mental health issues for students and extraordinary isolation. I don't have an answer for you. I have some little bit of answer, right? So I think if you're exclusively online, you're in a very difficult mental space. There's no question about it. So you better have another family life or something else going on that connects you, to the world. If you're truly a young 18-year-old sitting in your bedroom trying to get an online degree, I think that's a very unhealthy space to be in. But I'll tell you something else, all right? So even though we have something like 24,000 students on campus, campus life has changed almost completely. Now, these are on-campus students. They're not online students, but a lot of them will not actually show up in class. They will actually sit in their dorm rooms and look at the lecture online because it's just easier and you don't have to get up and, get out of your pajamas and actually show up in class. Increasingly, campus life is becoming where academics is done online, even though you are physically on campus. And what campus life is becoming is social life. They'll come to the football games, they'll come to, whatever student events are going on. And that's where the social connection is, that's where the parties are, that's where the beer is drunk. But work happens in the dorm. And that too is a concern. I mean, the question I think is really for us to design academics that will bring students out of the dorm room and into the classroom. So, who am I to argue if they're able to get their education online perfectly well? If I'm not providing the in-class experience that is so attractive that they'll actually come and do something, then, then I have failed in this environment. So I keep feeling that, hands-on education, building things, making things, there has to be something that draws you to come and have fun in the physical world with your classmates. So it's not just online. I think education overall will become increasingly digital unless we design experiences that can put people in the physical world.
So my question is, so increasingly, at least the perception that we're getting is the entry barrier to get into college is getting very difficult, right? Especially in India, at least it's very true. And whenever people see now for US universities, for example, acceptance rate is considered as a big criteria. So are there efforts to actually reduce this entry barrier? What are ways and means to promote more people to actually get into college education?
Oh, for sure. Look, I mean, there's different kinds of barriers in India and in the US, though, of course, money is also a barrier here. I mean, all of us are sort of middle-class people, and maybe we don't see how much of you got 1.4 billion people, right? We're definitely not providing education to all sectors of that 1.4 billion. In the US, I should contest some of the story that's being told, all right? The story about low acceptance rates, Stanford takes 5% and, Carnegie Mellon takes 3%, whatever, that's really the thinnest layer of private universities, all right? In the US, there are something like 17, 18 million undergraduate students in college, 16 million undergraduate students. You know how many are in the Ivy League schools altogether? 65,000, all right? And the entire writing that you see in the New York Times or the Washington Post is about these 65,000. Nobody's talking about the 16 million that are sitting underneath, all right? So the objective experience of actual students, not just rich students in Stanford or Harvard, is very, very different. And there, I will tell you that the public university has a role that this press has just not even begun to talk about, all right? This was a hugely visionary exercise in the same way that setting up the IITs, setting up the NITs, triple ITs was a really visionary experiment that India did. So I think what was the Model Act? I think 1863, something like that, at the time of Lincoln, the Model Act was passed, and the idea was that we would put universities in rural places like Corvallis, Oregon, to interact with farmers and to bring science into farming and agriculture. That was the start of the land-grant university, mechanization and science. And from that, therefore, if you look at land-grant university, you look at University of Illinois, or you look at any of Purdue or any of these places, they're strongly engineering-centric because of that agricultural connection. These are highly accessible. So even though the cost is higher than it should be, for example, Oregon State, our annual fees is $13,000 a year, right? Not small, but not $60,000 like in Harvard. And so, in fact, the big land grants are a heck of a good deal. I mean, if you are an engineer who can get an education, $13,000 plus some scholarships, and you're going to earn that in the first year of your work, all right? So, so the story you're hearing is really focused on these highly wealthy, highly selective schools, but there is a very strong undergirding of land grant schools, right? Now, do OSU students graduate with debt? Yeah, our average OSU student graduates with $22,000 in debt. Average engineer earns 60, 70K a year. So it's there, but it's not a killer, Now, of course, if you have a degree that doesn't earn you 60, 70K, then debt could become a problem, but it's nowhere near as what a Harvard student would rack up.
So thanks for the wonderful session that you had today. What was surprising for me was that in the country like US, we still have in engineering, and particularly if we look at computer science, 17 to 18% you're talking about. And when you're saying that the UCLA, you had 65% women or something like that.
In bioengineering, not overall.
So even if that we consider, and that's an increase in number of participation you're talking about, you were referring to some programs that you are, working on possibly promoting women in, let's say, college. And more so, let's say, when we talk about the faculty position or the career in any place we think about, what sort of programs you have, and also what should we do, and looking from the Indian perspective also, what should we do that women, and particularly the parents of women, because when we think about the college life, it's primarily the parents, and then later in the career time, women themselves see the potentials of becoming independent and, drive for those things or seek, the pleasure in attending.
No, really good question, right? So it's been hard work. I mean, even getting these numbers where they are. But I will make a radical prediction for the US. I predict 10 to 15 years from now, engineering is going to be majority female. That's my prediction. It'll happen. It won't happen uniformly. It'll happen very non-uniformly across the different engineering, but the average is going to be greater than 50%, not too far away. Certainly 20 years out, it will be the average. Women will be more than half because of these crazy dynamics we're seeing about men not going to college. That's really where this is going to come from. But of course, that's not true across the board. Mechanical will be low, computer science will be low. And the successes we've had, of course, have ridden disproportionately on bioengineering and environmental. And that's a part of the story. We were pushing very hard in our marketing to very particular constituencies. And we have to tell, I think, the human side of computer science, mechanical engineering, or women just won't come. I mean, if I tell the story of mechanical engineering as, hey, let's go build this muscle car that our students are building, it's not a sales point for women. But if you build an assistive robot, an exoskeleton that makes a paralyzed person walk, that's a story that I find young women are willing to buy, right? So the lesson I've learned is that doing something useful to engineering is the central story that young women are willing to accept. I don't know what the reason is. It may be our long social history, which is sort of more human-oriented, and maybe that's where it's coming from, but that's part of the story. But that's only the start of the story, right? I think the bigger problems we've had is exactly what you're bringing up, which is the experience through the undergraduate curriculum is not particularly positive. I mean, to this day, even at 25%, young women will constantly hear that that they're not good enough to be on a project team, or you put them on a project team, they'll be given secretarial duties, typing notes and that kind of thing. They never actually get to do engineering. And we tried to counter that through our programming. So we had a program at UCLA called We at UCLA, Women in Engineering at UCLA. And we would explicitly bring these up. I mean, training on, suppose you're on a project team, be aware that you're going to be delegated into typing roles. Don't take them, this is how you assert yourself. Put yourself in the engineering role. Don't be secretarial. We would have women coming in from industry, from Intel, from IBM, wherever, and talking about how to assert yourself in a meeting. Don't sit quiet. Put your hand, talk. Even if you're going to say rubbish, just go out there and talk. I mean, get into the habit of being heard. Don't be so accepting of being a quiet person sitting in the back of the room. So there's a lot of, and part of it is skill teaching, but also part of it is that they understand that the institution knows what they're going through, that the institution is behind them, all right? And that's the communication that has to constantly happen, is they have to know that their problem is not this little isolated problem that they can never talk to anybody about, So therefore, things like having women faculty, visible and leadership, male faculty who understand what these dynamics are and are willing to disrupt the system, these things are really important.
So that's actually relate to the career point of view, because particularly when women come to career, more often than not, the compromise happen with women than men. So what sort of support system or the program you think as the leader that should be provided to women who are young, navigating their challenges as the career they think of, because that's competitive point that they have to get at, and then at the same time they also are navigating their personal emotional challenges that they are undergoing.
No, good point. One of the damning numbers with engineering in the US is 5 years out into engineering careers, women leave engineering. So even if you work very, very hard to recruit women into engineering, and you work very, very hard to retain them in engineering through their undergraduate programs, through graduate degrees, 5 years out in jobs, they're gone. I mean, they're doing something else. Either they're not doing engineering at all, or they've gone into management or something, and they don't like being in that atmosphere. And that's a damning thing for the engineering profession. Some of it is, again, atmospherics. It's the same, project, nobody wants you on their project, also plays out in the professional circles. Big intersection with family and child rearing. It's well known that married women with children do worse career-wise than unmarried women or married women without children. This is a well-known statistic, which means that the price for children and child rearing is paid disproportionately by women. I mean, we all know this. We make this compromise, and so I think institutions have to accept the reality of women's biology. We can't be building institutions that ignore that fact. I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, women are the ones that bear children, and so when family burdens are disproportionate, first of all, you got to work to equalize the burden of family. They have to be shared between men and women, and that social conversation has to become more and more public. And institutions have to understand that people want to have kids. I mean, if you want a population that is stable and not collapsing, institutions have to support the bearing of children and the upbringing of children. And if you ignore that fact, then you get the kind of corporate culture that you actually get.
Okay, so I teach humanities here. And what I see here, as well as my experience in, about 10 years in the US, liberal arts, humanities, social sciences, in terms of faculty hiring, women are better represented, right? So in terms of who gets to participate, engineering might have a problem that the STEM disciplines have, but that more liberal arts-oriented, formulations of disciplines do not. But I'm wondering, because you're Oregon State president, right? So you would be able to give me a university-wide sort of perspective on this. In the US system, all of the women-heavy disciplines are substantially underpaid than the STEMs, right? Where having women faculty is a problem. So, women are then in disciplines that are undercompensated, in disciplines that are carrying the burden of gender representation. Right? So there is that disjunct. And we see that here as well in certain iterations of private universities.
I'm sorry.
Certain iterations of private universities have that.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of female faculty in English and history and social sciences departments in which, in universities where the flagship programs are engineering, and those are male-dominated. So there's this sort of clear, if a university wants to present itself as equal opportunity higher, it's these departments that are undercompensated do the heavy lifting. How do you,
No, it's certainly an issue, all right? No question about it. You're right that gender representation in the liberal arts is far more female. And of course, in the engineering, computer science areas, it's not. Compensation in the US system is market driven, all right? And so the driver is that, in computer science, you got to compete with the outside or else you're not going to be able to hire, right? I don't pay Google salaries, but computer scientists get paid far more than mechanical engineers, for example, right? And I have to do that if I have to hire people and retain them. And so market drivers are at the root of some of these differences. Of course, gender is underlying all of it, right? It depends on who, what kind of professions women choose and what they have chosen. So that is an issue. I won't say that we equalize salaries between the liberal arts and so on, but there's a very real effort to be as equitable as we can be given the pot of money that we have. Right? So I agree with you, it's an issue. So different parts, teachers, for example, in the US are largely female. Our education system is run by women, and they don't get paid anything. And that shows up in professorial salaries in the Department of Education. So we undergird this to some degree, but we can't, it's hard for us to go entirely anti-market. We just don't have the funding to do it, but it's a very good point.
So I have a question, nothing to do with gender, it's more to do with administrative. So what is your take on having very focused institutes like ours, which has maybe one or maximum two, as against actually having a multidisciplinary engineering itself, just the engineering stream? Because it's computer science in some ways is applied. A transition towards something which is multidisciplinary engineering in an institute like ours, what would be your take or suggestion?
Be careful what you bite off, all right? You have, look, there's a case to be made for both kinds of institutions. You'll are very concentrated, of course, on computer science and so on. And that, in a way, can be good because you can actually build a core of very good, very strong concentration and high achievement in those areas. What you miss, unless you explicitly design for it in some way, is that computer science is now everywhere, AI is everywhere, and so connections to, say, the humanities or the sciences have to be explicitly built. I suspect you can do some of it through hiring, but a lot of it through collaboration and connection. You have to do something explicit to build those kinds of connections. Caltech, for example, has built its entire reputation on being uncompromisingly tech, and they will make no apologies for it, and they never want to be a full-service university like UCLA or Oregon State. For us, the challenge is the opposite, is are we getting so big and sprawly that in fact we don't do anything well, and and we don't have the money to do everything well, and so how can we start trimming the outer edges to concentrate a bit more, is a conversation that every public school has every day. So I think you have to look at your mission very carefully and decide where your cutoffs really are. And if there will be pieces missing. If you're a concentrated one, I mean, I hate to call it a one-trick pony because you can be a one-trick racehorse and that's a pretty good place to be. What are the missing streams of information as computer science becomes ubiquitous, and how do you get those connections made? And part of the case I was making for our connection, for OSU's connection to IIIT this morning, is that we can bring the experimental sciences and the data to the mix, and maybe there is a relationship to be built, filling in the gaps that we both of us might have.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So what kind of policy changes or institutional support do you think best support women researchers at this time?
No, that's a really good question. What kind of policy changes should an institution make to support its women researchers? I mean, I tend to think of it in two different pieces. One is support for the work environment itself. I mean, there should be some basic undergirding in terms of, first of all, do you have structures that allow you to, seek redress if things are going wrong? We have an equal opportunity and access office, which maintains high confidentiality and high accountability and directly reports to me, and we go through every case on the docket twice a month. Are there institutional structures that protect women, or protect everybody really, but typically many things happen to women? So there's that kind of basic undergirding, in terms of laws. Then there is the less structured support. I mean, well, even let me go back to the previous thing. I mean, are there good maternity policies? Are there good childcare policies? Is there a delay on the 10-year clock? So acknowledging the physical biology of women, in their normal lives would be a good thing for any institution to actually do. And then there's the informal support. I mean, conversations, training, workshops, for men to understand the situation that women find themselves in these highly disproportionate environments. I think that's the kind of thing that an institute could be doing. And I'd be pushing very hard for all of us to be demanding equality in the family. I mean, man, if you have a spouse that ain't doing the dishes, they better be doing the dishes. I mean, so you really have to be not accepting of just taking on this other role at home.
You've been in scenarios where you probably didn't know how to, you didn't know what the next step would be. Scenarios that were very isolating or very challenging and not having examples to relate to.
Yeah.
So in such a scenario, how do you network with people so that you gain the confidence to overcome whatever challenges that you are facing? It could be administrative, it could be research, it could be teaching, but just beyond academics as well.
Yeah. No, very good point, all right? I mean, I didn't even know I had to network. I had zero clue that could be a good thing until much later in life. And that's how isolated we were. I mean, we didn't even know that this was a thing and that you could do it. And I found as I progressed and got older, is that very few stories are really that unique. I mean, there's always people who are undergoing exactly what you're undergoing, and there's no shame in it, and one ought to just ask for help or connect up and say hello. and, you know, and just jump in and do it, right? And nobody's going to bite anybody's head off. You just got to do it. The other thing I found, and so certainly find the women friends in engineering or outside, or in computer science or outside, and you'll find a lot of common ground. I mean, may not be identical, but there's a lot of common ground. But I also found that men are good people too, you know. I mean, they happen, you know, I found very good men friends from whom also there's a lot of support and connection to be had. And seeking mentors, you know, this is the other thing that I had no idea I could do, and I never asked anybody for help. I would just do it my way, and not because I could, but because I didn't know that anything else was possible. And the other thing I would ask of all of you is to understand that there are people younger than you who have exactly the same kind of questions, and to put yourself out, you know, offer help for a young person who's looking very isolated and sitting in a corner, male or female. I mean, I think to break that boundary would be really important.
As a public university in the United States, what is your university's position on intellectual property?
I mean, I don't know. Give me some more detail.
Yeah, so this recently came up right in our institute. Yeah. So we have a very active industry kind of ideas to the industry. So there's a very active part of the institute that does that. And this is also, as people were saying, now we have online education and so on. Yeah. So suddenly there's this feeling that we should start measuring everything with money, which is, of course, always there. Yeah. But the question I have is, I look at a university as primarily performing a public service. Yeah. Okay. And what we do is create knowledge and disseminate it. Yeah. And to a large extent, what we do as a faculty member, and I know that in some universities in the US, at least, the policy often is that what the university professor produces as part of, let us say, the teaching notes or slides, or tomorrow you write a paper, there is a certain copyright that the author holds. And that copyright comes with a certain ownership, which is not entirely ceded to the university.
It's in fact not ceded at all in many cases.
So that is something, in fact, we are debating about right now. Yeah. And I think more so as a public university, there is probably an extra level of sort of social obligation towards this, towards this ideal. So just thought I'd get your views on that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, teaching, I believe, is actually entirely ceded to the faculty member. I mean, you own your lecture notes, and that's your work. Of course, that's not true for research. All right, research is done on the university premises through university labs and things like that, and there the intellectual property is actually owned by the university, right? And so when people license the intellectual property, the proceeds from it are divvied up in different ways in different universities. Different percentages go to the author or to the producer of the research. Some parts of it go to the university. So those percentages, I mean, how much goes to the department is a matter of, great deal of arm wrestling and internal dissension. So there's a clear distinction between teaching materials and research so far. Yeah.
I have a question. This is from actually Professor Jayathi Shivaswamy. It's one of our senior professors. She has worked a lot on the diversity efforts here personally. Yeah. Unfortunately, she had some knee surgery or something, and she's not been here for time. But she wants to ask this question. Did you face any resistance from colleagues and the system for creating policies that supports women in research and retain them, etc.? How do you handle such resistance, if there were resistance?
Yeah, I mean, look, to some degree, that time precedes me. So fortunately, the women's movement in the U.S. was sufficiently far back that there's been a lot of institutional change. I mean, there's no question about it. And certainly at OSU and at UCLA, there's widespread support for these kinds of systems. Where there's resistance is generally if there are programs for hiring women into engineering preferentially, those kinds of things people will resist pretty strongly in departments. So we've generally not been pushing that kind of angle anyway. I mean, I think we remain relatively open in terms of building pipelines and then letting the process play out beyond the pipeline. We're not legally allowed to do anything else. But the other, in terms of, maternity policies and tenure clock and those kinds of things are well accepted. It's not a problem.
Ma'am, actually my question is, how did you manage your mental health during the time when you felt you were isolated or cornered?
Yeah. No, very good question. Thank you. I can't say that I did anything particularly intelligent, all right? I mean, I will actually say that if anything, I had no idea what resources were available. I would have been ashamed to ask for them, was ashamed to ask, and in fact, it didn't occur to me that I could even ask as part of the story. That is the level of isolation and lack of understanding of one situation was so deep that I don't know that I would have even asked, all right? But the conversation on mental health has shifted very significantly over my lifetime. And I find increasingly that we speak about mental health just like physical health. It's the same thing. And so as certainly on our campus, increasingly I find that it's not a stigma, or less of a stigma, I would say. And so we advertise our mental health services very strongly. People do come and access them, and there is a general change of attitude. Certainly I'm seeing it post-COVID, of being able to ask for help and to obtain help, right? And that's a very healthy thing to be doing. All right. Thank you. This was such a lovely conversation. I've never done this in India, all right? I mean, literally never. This is the very first time. And you've asked so many good questions spanning so many different topics. I just loved every minute of it. Thank you for the opportunity. I have a gift for you.
You get too.
We are good product state. We have enormous pine forest. And this is the Murthy river, not pine.
So they were just showing the breadth of activities in a large university like Oregon State. There's a team there that is mining out the oldest ice in Antarctica, million years old ice, to look at the air bubbles trapped there, study it to see what atmosphere was million years ago. So, and many other marine and agricultural like land grant university and in a